Hey gang, welcome to East Coast Kayaking. Thanks for all your likes. Please subscribe. Loving the comments. Keep them up. Today, tides. An introduction to tides. Position number 2. Governed by the moon, the gravitational pull of the moon. So when we've got full moons and new moons, we have high highs and low tides. When we have quarter moons, we have neap tides, low highs and high lows. Cool. Now, where do rapids occur in rivers? Where features get narrow and shallow. Where are tides relevant? Check out Port Phillip Bay. Tides are relevant where it gets narrow and shallow. We refer to that as constriction. So we've got narrow and shallow here. Now this is really interesting. Check out that 0.1. That means it's 0.1 or 10 centimeters deep at the lowest tide. Look where you are, 10 centimeters deep at the lowest tide. Now you've got other places such as Safety Beach, Martha Cove Harbour. You've also got Patterson River, narrow and shallow, as well as on the Yarra River, the tide runs up to here and then it ebbs back out, and so on. And look at this area here. It's very constricted between now the green areas on the chart. Very important. The green on the chart represents it's exposed at low tide and it's covered at high tide. Now over here is really interesting. We've got M on a green intertidal zone. That indicates mud, which really should be E for emotional, but more about that later. Other is S. S is for sand. Sand is good. You can set up your tent, you can walk and drag your kayak, you can play French cricket, have lunch, and whatever you may need to do. So, where are tides relevant in Port Phillip Bay? Where it gets narrow and shallow. So think of Port Phillip Bay as a bathtub. If I turn the tap on and the water pours in here, and I plug it, the tide comes up. If I let the plug go, the tide goes down. If I plug it, the tide comes up. If I deplug it, the tide goes down. So, where we are here at Sandringham Anchorage Picnic Point, are tides relevant? Well, they are, because there is a green intertidal zone. So depending on where we park the truck and trailer, or where you leave the kayaks, if you leave the kayaks too low and the tide comes in, they will start floating again, or the truck will be under a foot of water. But that would be it. Where are tides really relevant in the bay is what we call the rip. The tide runs out, and then the tide runs in, the tide runs out, and the tide runs in. And that can run at the speed of 8 knots. What's 8 knots? Approximately 16 kilometers per hour, which you can't paddle against. So, let's get out the Western Port chart to continue this. We've got the Western Port chart. Western Port. We've got French Island, we've got Phillip Island. Has anyone driven across the bridge to Phillip Island? Have you gone for a drive down to Flinders for a pie? Shoreham, Merricks, Balnarring, Summers. All right, Now let's have a quick look at Western Port compared to Port Phillip Bay. The first thing you notice is there's much more green. What's green again? Intertidal zone. It's exposed at low tide and covered at high tide. Now, here we go. M. M is mud, and it really should be E for emotional. All right, now let's unlock Western Port. First thing to be aware of, why have I drawn that line in on this chart? Because it's a watershed. If I had a rain cloud here and the rain landed on this side of the island, the water's going to drain this way out. If the rain cloud rained on this side, it's going to drain this way out. So check this out. The tide does the same thing. It floods in around French Island and then it ebbs back out around French Island. It floods in around French Island and it ebbs back out around French Island. Now here we go. Let's talk about moons again. Let's imagine we have a full moon and or a new moon, which means we have high tides and low tides. So let's look back here. Imagine we have a full moon, and a new moon. So all this green is water. And then for 6 hours, the water drains out this way and this way. All right. Now, what happens to the speed of the tidal zone here? It increases in speed because it's constricted. Now, where does the erosion occur on a river bend? On the outside corner or the inside corner? The erosion occurs on the outside corner, so we call that the sweep. If you're paddling with the tide, you would want to go with the sweep for extra lift. If you're trying to paddle against it, you might want to come up on the inside corner. Now, if the tide is going that way and the wind is blowing in the opposite direction, that's wind against tide. What occurs to the surface area in wind against tide? It becomes really friction. It becomes really steep and choppy, and generally sea kayakers try to avoid wind against tide. And now the tide continues pouring out. The tide continues pouring out. We've got a protruding landmass. A protruding landmass creates an eddy. An eddy. So, team, we have a watershed. We have an area of constriction. This is all constriction, so it runs like a river. This is the sweep. Wind against tide creates friction and very choppy water, and we generally avoid at all costs. And the water pours out. Protruding land masses create eddies. Like, subscribe. We also recommend you undertake training with a Paddle Australia instructor so you understand how fun kayaking can be, and you're also aware of the inherent dangers as well. Get out, explore your back garden, team.